Chords. So we already know some about altered notes. Here's or actually spell a C major chord for me.
C, G, G.
C, E, G. Right. And now spell a minor chord.
C, E flat, F, A, C.
C, E flat, G. Right? Right. Now if I take this fifth, I can lower it.
Yep.
Let me just take a major chord. I can lower it, and we call that flat 5. So if I see a chord that says C flat 5, I just take C, E, G, lower it. I can also raise it. I call that augmented 5. Right, so those are the main changes we'll see in a simple triad. Major, lowering the third. Actually, major, raising the third. Your textbook calls that suspended. A suspended fourth, because this note is 1, 2, 3, 4. So manipulating the third, I can drop it by a half step, we call it minor. I can raise it by a half step, we call it suspended. I can alter the fifth by lowering it, we'll call it flat 5. Or raising it, we'll call it augmented 5, right? Now we can talk about extended chords, and the first extension of a chord is the seventh, right? So I'm going to start in G. If I play the triad and simply add one more note, that is a seventh chord. Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's the seventh note of the scale. If I went to this note, it would still be the seventh note of the scale, because F is the seventh note of the scale. So we've got a G chord with an F on the top, or a G chord with an F sharp on the top. Right, and they have distinctly different sounds, don't they? Right. Notice that this is a full second below the root, and this is a minor second below the root. Typically, we call this a dominant seventh chord. Your textbook calls it a major minor seventh chord. That's because it's a major chord with a minor seventh on the top. That is not the terminology that is most widely used in a theory textbook. Theory textbooks will normally call this a dominant 7 chord. If you're jamming with a blues group, they'll call it a dominant 7 chord. Right? This, that's a major 7th, because this interval, 11 half steps, is a major 7th. It's a half step below the root. So we call this a G major 7th chord. Right? Right? Now, once you get that G chord, that doesn't mean that these other alternations, notes can't also be alternated. I can have this G7 chord with flat 5. I can have this G7 chord with a minor. That's a G minor 7 chord. I can have a G7 chord with it raising the third. That's suspended 7th chord. So let's back up before we get in over our heads, or are we already there? Already. Let's go back to just 3 notes. I can change the third. By going down, it becomes what?
Minor.
Or up?
Suspended.
Suspended. Some people do call it sustained. I think suspended is a better term. Right? I can alternate the fifth. I can alter the fifth by lowering it. Flat 5. Raise it. Augmented. Right? I can add a 7th. It's a minor 7th because it's 10 half steps, a whole step below the root. Or I can add a major 7th. It's 11 half steps up, or a half step below the root. I can. Those are common. I can lower the third. Minor chord with a major 7th. That's interesting sounding, isn't it? I can have a minor seventh, and that gives me this sound. Let's see. Rock and roll trivia? Anybody? Too old for many of you.
Yeah.
Well, you know I'm not telling you. All right. Now, as if sevenths weren't complicated enough, when we extend these chords, we're stacking things in thirds. Up a third, that makes a chord. If I stack another third, that makes a seventh. If I stack another third, that makes a what? Ninth. Ninth. If I stack another third, 11. Right? And the more you do this, the more these chords become jazzy sounding. But then once I do that, then these notes have their own qualities. And it could be a minor ninth, or a flat ninth, it could say. It would more likely say flat ninth. It could be a minor chord with a flat ninth, right? So when you're looking at jazz books, and it says C minor 7. It's a minor chord with a 7th. And how do you find the 7th? It's typically up a minor third from the 5th. In the key of G, they're just white notes. If you see a 9th, it's just up another third. If you were to see an 11th, right? Ancient rock and roll trivia, Terry. See.
Al Green. No, it's not Al Green. Oh, I know that is. That's like if you keep playing, it'll come to me.
Any help, John?
That change melody?
No, that's a good one.
That's
You know I'm not
Yes,
telling
it
you.
did.
It's not on chain melody.
Yes, you played one day. I think I found what it was, but I don't know if you remember which one you had been playing.
Well,
You're not telling me.
if you tell me the title,
She's like, you're not telling me.
Wasn't it the Irish composer Enya, and it was Watermark?
no.
No?
You know why I know that? Because I've never heard that composer or that song.
Because that's what I wanted to say that day, but I thought,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
this is probably a lady who's like, taken
Uh-huh.
a piece from
Right.
your classical.
Okay, so now let's do some ear
That's probably
training.
what she's done.
Let's do some ear training. Okay? All right? So, why don't you guys sit in those chairs for a second? Now I'll play the chord, and all these chords